美国司法部28日宣布，对华为技术公司以及其在美子公司以及首席财务官孟晚舟正式进行起诉。两份起诉书罪名共23项，其中包括窃取商业机密、银行诈骗、电汇诈骗等等。29日，美国正式向加拿大提出引渡孟晚舟，而孟晚舟因为保释条件有变，原先定好2月6日在温哥华法庭举行的听证会被推迟到了3月6日。FBI 对华为的调查追溯到10年之前，孟晚舟将听证会日期推迟，雇佣了新的有名的美国律师，又是为了哪搬？他被引渡的可能性到底有多高？我们请到了来自霍夫斯特拉大学的法律教授古举伦给我们分析这件案件。
So the first thing I want to ask something about the indictment against Huawei and孟晚舟. So through reading the indictment, is there something that comes out as surprising or unusual to you? Because from my perspective, I noticed that the charges against Huawei are originally based on a civil lawsuit, and they bring it up to a criminal level. So from a legal perspective, is that normal?
You're talking about, there are two separate indictments. There's one for trade secret theft in Seattle, essentially, and then one for essentially fraud and sanctions violations in New York. So the Seattle one, trade secret theft, you're right, that started off as a civil suit. It's not uncommon because some of the behavior that is a violation, that's a tort, that's an injury to another company, can also be, as it was here, a crime. The difference is that the legal standard is more strenuous, so that it's harder to prove a crime than it is to prove a civil violation, or civil tort. So that's why. But they do have additional evidence, appears, that the civil case did not have, and that also may explain why they decided to bring the criminal case.
So, is there anything else that caught your eyes?
Well, so the additional evidence they have in the Seattle case is, I think, pretty remarkable. The evidence that Huawei had a program where they reward employees who are able to steal technology or intellectual property from other companies. That's a pretty serious allegation. They appear to have emails that prove this to be the case. And if they're able to prove that, that would be that would show the company as a whole was engaged in a strategy to steal things from other companies. So that is a pretty serious thing, and if they can prove that, I think that's a pretty serious charge against Huawei, and it would call into question the way Huawei conducts business as a whole. Because if they're willing to do that for this particular example, they're probably doing it for other companies as well. And so that was pretty remarkable, I think. The other thing that stuck out to me in the New York indictments was that that they also note that there are other Huawei executives who are not named who might also be indicted, or who may have also been indicted, in addition to Ms. Meng. But they didn't reveal those names. They blacked them out in the indictment. So there are probably other Huawei executives who are going to be charged, or potentially if they're arrested somewhere, they might be charged. And then the other thing was that they suggested that the founder of Huawei himself engaged in some of the same kind of behavior, that essentially lying to the U.S. government about what Huawei was doing in Iran. So both those, I think, are unusual because it's rare to have evidence from the leadership of the company themselves. Usually in these cases, there's like a lower-level employee who does something, and the upper-level employees are held liable for not overseeing the lower-level employees. And that's the vast majority of the cases involving fraud or sanctions violations. That's what happens. Someone in the lower level did not follow the rules, and the upper level did not keep track of them. But what they're alleging in the case against Huawei is that the leadership of the company, the founder himself, the chief financial officer, Ms. Meng, and maybe other Huawei executives were directly and personally involved in the alleged fraud and sanctions violations. And so that is unusual in these sorts of cases because of this kind of personal evidence of wrongdoing, personal wrongdoing. And so that does make this, I think, more serious for Huawei than I think in cases involving other companies for similar violations.
There are actually some speculations that one of the names that are deducted is actually Renjengfei. So I wonder, what do you think about that?
It's not Renjengfei because they named him separately as, and they didn't black out his name. So if they were going to indict him, they would have blacked out his name. So it's almost certainly not Renjengfei. And it may be because the statement he made was from 2007, and so maybe that was too far in the past to prosecute him now for it. But they just wanted to show that the company's leadership was involved in the alleged fraud.
And I noticed the fact that the whole news conference that the Department of Justice had didn't mention anything about espionage or spying on behalf of the Chinese government. Do you think it's only because of a lack of evidence, or it's something else?
Yeah, that's true, and that's an important point to make, that there's no evidence in these criminal cases of the Chinese government's relationship or involvement in Huawei. They're also so that's and they could, if they did have such evidence, that they could have charged Huawei with spying on behalf of a foreign government, which is a different crime. So it is striking they don't have that information. I think there are two possibilities. One is that they don't have evidence of this, which is probably and so therefore that's why they didn't charge them with it. The other possibility is that they do have evidence of Chinese government involvement, but the evidence is not something that they can use in court, because to use things in court you have to legally obtain the evidence. You can't steal. Like if the U.S. government was spying on Huawei without proper legal authorization, but just spying on them, and they found information out about a Chinese government connection, even if they had the information, they couldn't use it in court. The court would not allow them to use it because it was illegally obtained, or not legally obtained. So that's the other possibility, is that they do have information, but they can't use it in court. I guess a third possibility is that they do have information that they could use in court, but it would reveal how they're spying on Huawei, which they don't want to reveal. So all three are possible, are real possibilities. It's hard to tell which is the most likely.
I see. So on Meng Wanzhou, so I'm sure you've noticed that her hearing has been postponed to March. So I was wondering, what do you think, and do you think Canada would eventually grant this extradition?
I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but I think in other cases like hers, Canada has granted extradition, and other countries haven't granted extradition. So I would be surprised if they did not grant extradition. There's a lot of strong evidence that the U.S. government has presented, and the court in Canada's only decision is whether there's enough evidence to go to trial, not whether the evidence is true or not. They just have to say, is there enough evidence to charge her with a crime? Just like, is there enough evidence to arrest a criminal? So it doesn't have to prove her guilt. And so by that standard, the U.S. government, I think, has met that standard easily. So it would be surprising to me if they did not extradite her. However, having said that, the only reason they wouldn't, I think, would be because the pressure the Chinese government is putting on them is so strong. And so it would be very hard for them. I mean, they're under a lot of pressure because of the retaliation against Canadians living in China, and and maybe other pressure the Chinese government has put on Canada that might make them less likely to extradite her.
And also, if she eventually did get extradited, then what's next for her? Do you think she would appeal, and how long is this whole process of getting her?
So she can appeal in Canadian courts. Again, the appeal would just be of her extradition, and that could drag out the process quite a bit because the courts there are not obligated to move quickly. So that could go on for another year even for the appeal. And I would expect that she would appeal, and so that she could slow down the process. And the reason, I think, is because when she fights the extradition in Canada, she won't be arguing about whether she's guilty or not. She'll be arguing about whether the United States would treat her fairly or whether there's a political motivation for this. Once she comes to the United States, the case will be about whether she's guilty or not and the evidence that's presented against her. And so I think she has a better chance in Canada of, fighting the extradition than she does here in the States, because when she comes here, they're going to present a lot of evidence against her, and she'll have to answer to all the evidence and try to explain why the evidence is not correct.
And can she continue to postpone the hearing?
Well, she can. The judge doesn't have to let her do it, but she can ask for it. She needs to have some reason, though.
Okay. And have you heard about her new lawyer? How much do you know about him? And
I've not. I've heard she has new lawyers, but I don't have any knowledge about him.
No. Okay. Also, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but during the news brief from the Department of Justice, a lot of reporters are asking about whether this is actually related to the trade talk that the U.S. and China is having, because it comes at such a critical time. So a lot of them are suspecting that the U.S. is using this as a talking point. So do you think it's separated or?
Again, it's very difficult to tell. In principle, they would not have gone forward with the indictments yesterday, I think. Or at least it's less likely they would have gone with all the indictments yesterday if they wanted to bargain. But maybe, and they've shown no indication that they want to bargain with the Chinese with respect to these indictments. However, anything is possible because the trade negotiations are, we're very wide-ranging, and in theory could involve it. In principle, they shouldn't, because the U.S. government does not generally trade criminal prosecutions for trade benefits. And so that would be a very big change in U.S. policy to do such a thing.
And is there any possibility that the U.S. and China would use this, would use political interference to try to settle this case down? Is it possible?
I mean, they could. I think the Chinese could ask the U.S. to drop it, and I think it's very hard for the United States government to do that without embarrassing themselves, because they went through the trouble of gathering all this evidence and charging, and to drop it and say that, actually, we don't think it's very important criminally because of trade benefits, would be very embarrassing politically for the president and his administration.
And is it usual, or it comes as surprising to you, that the U.S. bring out such a large group of political figures from different departments, like Chamber of Commerce and Department of Justice, and just bringing out 8 figures, political leaders, for the news briefs? Is that normal, or what do you think they are doing this?
It's not normal. It's not. It's reserved only for really important cases, and it shows that the administration places a high priority on these sorts of enforcement actions against Chinese companies. In particular, I think they were there because they wanted to emphasize they really take seriously the problem of trade secret and intellectual property theft, which was at the heart of the case in Seattle. But it is very unusual. It's a sign that I think they want to show maybe the Chinese government, but also just people in general, that this is something the entire U.S. government is focusing on, trying to prosecute or block or punish Chinese companies that commit wrongdoing under U.S. law.
And my last question would be, what do you think of Trump's role in this? Because it has repeatedly expressed the willingness to interfere, but hasn't really.
Well, he's only said it once, actually. He hasn't repeated it. So that's why it makes me think he probably is being strongly advised not to. And I think that he only said the statement in answer to a question, but he is unpredictable. But I think since he hasn't repeated it, it may be a sign that he's less likely to try to trade. Certainly, I think his advisors will all tell him not to get involved in that kind of trade. I would be surprised if any of the trade negotiators for the United States are discussing that as well. But...
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Ku. Have a nice rest of the day. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
关于华为和孟晚舟一案的最新情况，明镜电视会进行跟进，欢迎您随时关注。